all of you from across the country to our webinar on volunteer transportation. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm Michael Audino. I am one of the researchers that Jennifer referenced with real-world experience who conducts applied research here at the Center for Urban Transportation Research. I was kind of struck. It seems like we, or you as the audience, we tend to participate in our webinars the same way most of us drive, which is by ourselves. And it was also nice to see a good geographic balance across the country. And as I said, welcome to all of you. Thanks to all of you. And maybe I'll extend an extra welcome to those of you who are participating in your very first CUTR webinar. I won't go into a whole lot of detail about me and my background, because I'm guessing, quite frankly, that's not really why you're participating. But just to kind of help you frame the conversation a little bit, I've been doing this transit and transportation thing for close to 30 years now. Included time with a consulting firm and the Transit Authority in Philadelphia. I spent 8 years managing an 8-county rural system in southwest Iowa. Half a dozen years or so managing public transit and aviation programs for the Iowa Department of Transportation. A few years conducting marketing for the Des Moines Airport. And since '03, I've been here in Florida and affiliated with CUTR, where I conduct a variety of applied research programs. And as a quick aside, particularly for the dozen or so of you who are from nonprofit organizations, I've also been involved with the company that provides advice and guidance to nonprofit organizations. So I have a little bit of a feel and appreciation for the work that you all do. So I come to you today with, as I've just indicated, some real-world transit and transportation experience and appreciation for the work that you all do, and frankly a passion for this volunteer transportation topic. What I hope to accomplish today are several basic things. If I could hopefully educate you a little bit, hopefully inform you a little bit, and perhaps most importantly, maybe inspire you a little bit. You know, from my perspective, this will be a successful webinar if at least one of you leaves our time together today and either begins a conversation about volunteer transportation in your community, or increases the level of volunteer transportation you might currently be providing, or maybe even decides to serve as a volunteer driver in some way, shape, or form in your hometown. So that's my request and my definition of a successful webinar. More specifically, in terms of our time together, I want to, and I will momentarily begin with providing you a little better, hopefully a little better understanding and recognition of our nation's generosity heritage, which, quite frankly, I think is fundamental to volunteer transportation. I'll spend a little time talking about the variety of volunteer transportation models based upon research that my CUTR colleague Sarah Hendricks and I conducted back in '07 and '08. Hopefully talk a little bit about and help you recognize some of the key planning issues that you need to address with respect to volunteer transportation. And then lastly, as I said, try to encourage you to take action, to move the needle a little bit in your hometown, as I say. So with that, let me tee up a poll question for you. And it's pretty straightforward. Does your organization offer volunteer transportation? Yes or no? Looks like a little over half of you have responded so far. I'll give you another few seconds to respond. Okay, Jennifer, if you would kindly close the poll. And as you can see, we have about half of the participants who don't offer volunteer transportation, and a good and a significant portion of you that do. The frankly, one of the downsides to a webinar is that it'll be challenging for me to leverage the knowledge and the experience that those of you who have answered yes bring to this conversation. But maybe at the end in the Q&A, you can help that. And for those of you who are unsure, hopefully when our time together is over, you'll be able to answer that question either yes or no. So let's talk a little bit about from my perspective, the context, with respect to volunteer transportation. Not surprisingly, well, I'm assuming not surprisingly in your community, but at least here in the Tampa area and in every community where I visit, the demand for mobility, the demand for transportation far exceeds the supply. Despite our best efforts with respect to public transit and automobile ownership, there's still a greater demand for people to get from here to there than the supply can meet. Secondly, again, as I mentioned, I've been in this public transit industry for 30-plus years, and quite candidly, in many respects, public transit does not meet the needs of many customers. And lastly, we as a nation can't print enough money, we can't buy enough buses, we can't hire enough drivers to satisfy all of those mobility needs. So we have to be about the business of doing some different things or doing things differently. And I would submit to you that for many people and for many communities, volunteer transportation is a different thing. It is a potential solution that has not yet been implemented. And I strongly encourage, that's part of this conversation today, I strongly encourage individuals, organizations, and communities to recognize the importance of volunteer transportation and try to make something along those lines happen in their respective community. So with that, let me tee up another poll question, this one having much less to do with transportation and much more to do with history. Who is Jonathan Winthrop? This appears to be a more difficult question as it's taking folks longer to respond. Just a couple more moments for those of you who still want to answer. I'm surprised no one thinks that Jonathan is an unannounced candidate for president. Okay, Jennifer, if you'd be kind enough to close the poll, I'd appreciate that. Well, actually, Jonathan Winthrop, for those 8 of you who said he was former governor of the colony of Massachusetts, you are correct. Jonathan Winthrop, back in the 1630s, as governor of the colony of Massachusetts, while speaking to his fellow pilgrims, uttered the phrase that you see on your screen. And to paraphrase, he said to his pilgrims, we must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities to satisfy the necessities of others. Now, first of all, I love the way those words flow, and I wish people spoke and wrote like that today, but they don't. But more to the point, what was Jonathan Winthrop saying? Well, I would submit to you that what he was saying is that he was calling for generosity as a way for the pilgrims to build our new land. Keep in mind, this is in 1630. He was calling for pilgrims to view sharing as a fundamental way of life. He was reinforcing, if you will, the notion of loving your neighbor as yourself. Bottom line, he's saying those that have a responsibility to take care of those who have not. And I would further submit to you that with those words, Jonathan Winthrop was establishing one of the foundations upon which our great nation is built, that generosity heritage. So, roll the clock forward 100 years. And we're all familiar with the Declaration of Independence, but I think it's important for you just to take a moment and think about, again, the context in which that document was authored, And I want you to pay particular attention, if you would please, to the words that I've highlighted there. You know, this was our nation declaring to the world what we believed and how we were going to behave. And again, look at the last three lines. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. You know, we weren't saying to the world, well, okay, if it feels good, maybe we'll take care of one another. And we weren't saying, well, if it doesn't hurt me too much, maybe I'll help a brother out. No, we were saying that we were mutually pledging to one another. We were pledging our lives, we were pledging our fortunes, and we were pledging our sacred honor. And what we were doing as Americans was we were mutually assuring our respective well-being. And I would say to you that the individual or the group that routinely neglects others or routinely neglects their fellow citizen in order to satisfy their own personal well-being and make themselves happy, that individual is violating our fundamental social contract. And between the words of Jonathan Winthrop and the Declaration of Independence, I would submit to you that as Americans, we have an obligation to be generous and to personally engage such that we're helping our fellow citizens. So how does that fundamental heritage of generosity and the words of the Declaration of Independence manifest themselves? Well, I would submit to you that philanthropy is clearly, as I've stated, a great American heritage and something of which we should be proud. No country on earth is as generous as we are. We donate approximately 2% of our gross domestic product annually. The next closest country is Great Britain, which is slightly less than 1%. The fact that 89% of us as Americans donate or contribute to others, I think reflects that value that I spoke about just a moment ago of mutually assuring the benefit of all. You know, right, wrong, or indifferent, you know, more Americans contribute than vote. And what's also interesting to me is that the vast majority of donations come from individuals, not major corporations, as folks would say. And at the end of the day, philanthropy and generosity is important because it advances three types of capital. It advances physical capital. Again, for those of you in the audience who come particularly from nonprofit organizations, you know how fundraising can help build art museums and in some cases actually purchase transit vehicles. So philanthropy advances physical capital. It advances intellectual capital, which is ideas, researchers. There are a myriad of examples of where modern-day inventions or modern-day products were the result of research, and that research originally was funded by a philanthropist. And then lastly, philanthropy advances human capital. It helps individuals progress through life. So that's the context that I want to talk about volunteer transportation. So let's transition a little bit. Many volunteer transportation programs tend to focus their work on addressing the mobility needs of individuals who are over the age of 60, the elderly segment or the seniors. In fact, the CUTR research that I referenced a moment ago that Sarah Hendricks and I completed back in 2008, and then I'll talk about a little bit more here in just a moment, had that very same focus. But I think it's important to remember that mobility challenges are faced by many individuals in this country, whether it's individuals living with disabilities who need transportation to and from work, or whether it's Head Start kids or non-Head Start kids, children, school-age children who need transportation to school or ride home afterwards, Medicaid recipients. I say single mothers on the list. It doesn't have to be a single mother. Any mother who might need, or father who needs rides to daycare and to a job. We talk about the seniors, individuals needing a ride home after leaving a hospital, low-income families who need reliable access to jobs. Again, there's a myriad of mobility challenges out there, ladies and gentlemen, and I want you to keep, as you're moving forward and as you listen to the balance of this webinar and maybe more importantly after the webinar, and you think about things that you can do in your community, I encourage you to recognize that there are a variety of challenges out there that need to be addressed. And many times we fall into these old paradigms of thinking that, more specifically, when I was managing that rural transit system in southwest Iowa in the early 80s, and I would go visit a meal site or a senior center and talk about transportation. The individuals I saw there looked significantly different than the individuals that you would see at a senior center today. Today's seniors, as many of you know, are more vibrant, they're healthier, they are more mobile. I'm not saying they have all of their mobility needs met at all. That's not my point. My point is that we, as professionals in the transportation arena, need to be recognizing that there are other segments of our population who have just as many mobility needs as do our seniors. So with that, let me ask you another poll question, and we'll start to get into the details here in just a second. Which of those three is not a challenge for volunteer transportation programs? Give you another 5 seconds or so to complete the question. Okay, Jennifer, if you'd be kind enough to close the poll, I would appreciate that. And the prize goes to those individuals who said too many volunteers is not a challenge and this is based upon the research that, again, we at CUTR did, Sarah Hendricks and myself. The research report is programs that match seniors with volunteer drivers. We published that in 2008. And what you have in front of you on that slide are some of the major, what I would characterize as the major findings. And the next to last one talks about volunteer recruitment being the #1 challenge, which is why too many volunteers is never a problem for volunteer transportation programs. Too few volunteers, definitely. Uninformed local stakeholders, definitely. But never too many volunteers. Just a couple of comments on these bullet points. Those of you in the audience who indicate that you do operate volunteer transportation probably agree, maybe you agree with everything here. Maybe you disagree with everything here, but our research findings would suggest that most volunteer, if not all volunteer transportation programs, are serious about risk management, whether that's in how they recruit drivers, whether that's how they train drivers, whether that's the background checks, criminal background checks, personal interviews, ongoing training, vehicle inspection requirements. Volunteer transportation programs are very knowledgeable and very professional and place a great deal of importance on risk management. For those who think insurance products are unavailable, quite to the contrary. There's plenty of insurance out there available, and much of it is affordable. And I think you'll see in one of my last slides, I'm of the school of thought that insurance or liability is unfortunately a red herring in the whole volunteer transportation arena. It's, I would submit to you, an excuse that a lot of individuals and a lot of organizations utilize to not do something. I'm not saying liability is risk is an issue. Liability is an issue. There's risk in everything that we do every day. We live in such a litigious society that there's liability associated with everything we do every day. But the research will show, and those of you in the room who are on the webinar who operate volunteer programs, you know that you can provide these services, you can provide the protection that's appropriate, and maybe most importantly do so while addressing the mobility needs. Research also shows that volunteer programs are extraordinarily safe, very few incidents with respect to crashes and or bodily damage, or bodily injury, excuse me, property damage. I mentioned volunteer recruitment being the #1 challenge. And then that last bullet, I don't mean to suggest that community leaders are ignorant. I'm really saying that in many cases, what we need to do is start a conversation about volunteer transportation. Many times there is no dialogue. And again, that's part of one of the desired outcomes of our webinar today. I'm assuming some of you in the room are familiar with the Beverly Foundation. Tremendous resource for volunteer transportation. Their mission focuses primarily on programs that help seniors, but they are some of the principles, clearly some of the research, some of the products they produce are value added no matter what market segment you're serving. What I have on the screen are some statistics that were compiled by the Beverly Foundation. They have plus or minus 180 or a couple of hundred supplemental transportation programs with whom they interact. And the numbers that I show on screen give you some data as far as the median budget for those organizations. As you can see, 71% of them rely on volunteer drivers only. And maybe the most important number there is the average cost per ride of $7.73, which for those of you who are providing any type of demand responsive or paratransit service realize that that's a number that's extraordinarily difficult to beat. And within the Beverly Foundation, they have what they characterize as their 5 A's for mobility or transportation, and particularly as it relates to volunteer. It should be available, which means anyone can use it, and there are expansive hours of operation. It should be acceptable, and by that they emphasize use of a private automobile as opposed to a quote-unquote institutionally owned vehicle. It should be accessible, which means that the majority of individuals can utilize the service. It should be affordable. So they, being the Beverly Foundation, place emphasis on volunteers using their own vehicle. And it should be adaptable. And by that they mean it serves a variety of destinations and multiple destinations. So the Beverly Foundation, great resource for information and some very practical tools that you could utilize to begin that volunteer transportation conversation in your community. And their website, beverlyfoundation.org, I would encourage you to visit that. TRIPS model. TRIPS is affiliated with the Beverly Foundation, but the model itself is somewhat unique. Began out in California 15 years ago or so, and again, some statistics there. But what I want to emphasize here is that with the TRIPS model, the individual rider is responsible for recruiting his or her driver. There's no sort of third party that serves as the broker or the intermediary. And when there's mileage reimbursement involved, the reimbursement goes to the rider, who in turn then pays their driver. And fundamental to this model is the empowerment that it provides to the rider. And it also creates, from a liability perspective, it also creates an arm's length distance there. Again, there's no third party functioning as the broker. And another model that I would encourage you to take a look at. Many of you have probably heard of ITN America, and their website is at the top of that slide. They are a membership-based volunteer program. They have affiliates now in 19 different states. Here in Florida, I know there's an affiliate in Orlando. I know there's an affiliate in Sarasota, and as you can see, in 18 other states across the country. Again, membership-based. They do charge a fee for their service. Their focus is on door through door, and you can see their average trip length and their average trip cost. Again, while a bit more than the data I showed you from the Beverly Foundation. Still, when you compare that to what it might cost you as a paratransit operator or a demand response system operator, a pretty affordable rate. And if there are any webinar junkies in the audience today, there is ITN is conducting a webinar this afternoon, begins at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and they will be having some of their affiliate representatives participating in the webinar and offering some perspectives there. So if you're interested, their website, itnamerica.org, is where you can register. Again, back to the research that Sarah and I conducted. Really, what we identified 5 fundamental options for structuring a volunteer transportation program. What we characterize as the informal service, which is the work, frankly, that many of us, you included, do every day. Whether you're transporting your neighbor to the grocery store or, as my wife is doing even as we speak, transporting our 97-year-old neighbor to the doctor. It's just that informal thing. And there's a lot of that goes on. And frankly, if we all did just a little bit more of that, we could begin to address that mobility challenge. Local government programs, again, I don't have the data in front of me, so I don't know how many of you today are from local governments, but I know I happen to serve on the board of directors of the Gulfport Senior Center Foundation. Gulfport is a town of about 13,000 people here in the Tampa area. They have a demand responsive transportation program and a small volunteer component, which is actually run by the city of Gulfport. The foundation is the fundraising arm, but the transportation service is actually provided by the city. Social service programs that tend to be market focused. An example there might be, and I'm not quite sure to put it here, but hopefully many of you in the room are familiar with the American Cancer Society's Road to Recovery program. Extraordinary example of how a volunteer transportation program is meeting the needs of a unique group of individuals. Membership-based, I mentioned ITN just a moment or two ago. There are examples of, well, here in the in Clearwater, Florida, there's a Neighborly Care Network, which has a membership-based volunteer transportation program, and then faith-based initiatives. And maybe the best example there are the Faith in Action programs that exist all across the country. So those are the options, if you will, as far as how you might organize something. In terms of that community dialogue locally, if you will, some key decision points that need to be addressed that many of you have already gone through. But for those of you who are looking to initiate volunteer transportation, I encourage you to be thoughtful and deliberative about these 5 bulleted items. What is the target market you're looking to serve? 15 minutes ago I had a slide up on the screen that talked about persons with disabilities and children and Medicaid recipients. Who is it that you're wanting to serve? Is it a small market segment, or is it a broader group of individuals? No right or wrong, but it's important that you have a conversation around whom it is that whose needs are you trying to address. What's the service territory that you're looking to serve? Is it a neighborhood? Is it a series of neighborhoods? Is it a community? Is it a county? Is it multi-county? Your decisions clearly impact the complexity of the program. They would impact the cost of the program. Frankly, they would have an impact on the risk and the liability as well. So again, the geographic area you're looking to serve. What trip purpose are you looking to satisfy? Would it be strictly for medical? Would it be for shopping? Would it be for anything? The last 2 on that list, the service quality and the fair or free, probably have as much to do with the risk and the liability as anything. And when I talk about service quality, I'm talking about, on one extreme, sort of your traditional curb to curb. On the other end of that continuum would be the door through door. It's you assume one level of risk and liability if your volunteer driver pulls up to the curb and honks the horn and Joe and Martha Smith come out of their home and get in your vehicle, and you take them somewhere and you drop them off, and then you pick them back up and you take them home and drop them off at the curb. That's one level of service. The other extreme is you pull up to Joe and Martha's house and you park the car and you go knock on the door and you go through the door and maybe you help them with their walker or their mobility aid device or whatever. You escort them to the car, you help them in the car, and then you reverse that process on the return trip. A whole different level of potential risk and liability. So again, thoughtful deliberation and conversation needs to occur at the community level around that point. And then the last bullet there, will you charge for your service or will you make it free? A couple of the ITN model I mentioned and the Neighborly Care Network here in Clearwater, two examples of models where not only is there an annual membership fee, but there's also a per trip charge. And in many cases, if you're charging for the service, there tends to be a little different, the insurance carriers might take a slightly different look at your service, and not only does it impact it has the potential for impacting insurance, but also you need to think about it from your target market perspective. If your target market are persons of low income, probably does not make a whole lot of sense to be charging a fare for that service. So those are what I would characterize as the key decision points. Let me start to bring some closure then to the more structured part of the presentation and ensure that we have plenty of time for Q&A. You know, I tend to be a bit passionate about this volunteer transportation program and initiative. Candidly, ladies and gentlemen, I wish I would have known more about this, 30 years ago when I was managing that multi-county system. I wish I would have known more about volunteer transportation when I was directing transit programs for the Iowa DOT, because had I known more, had I been more passionate then, perhaps I would have invested more time, energy, and effort to make things happen. But, that was then, this is now. Regardless, volunteer transportation is not a silver bullet. It is not the end-all, be-all. There, as I said earlier, we have plenty of mobility challenges and needs in this country. Volunteer transportation is just one more tool in your toolbox. It's one more arrow in your quiver. I don't care whatever metaphor you want to use there. But it cannot be, probably will never be, the end-all, be-all. So I don't want you to think that I'm here suggesting that it is. It isn't. But it is a valuable tool that can enhance mobility for the residents of your community if implemented. I stated already that my feeling on liability insurance, and candidly, it's not just a feeling. The research shows that volunteer transportation programs are safe. There is insurance available. That insurance is affordable. There is no reason why individuals can't be volunteering, shouldn't be volunteering to drive. I'll give you a personal example. I mentioned the American Cancer Society earlier. I devote a couple hours of my life each week to the American Cancer Society, transporting cancer patients to and from treatment. I went through a training program, a couple hours in length, from the American Cancer Society. Other than that, nothing in my life has changed. My insurance hasn't gone up. My insurance company hasn't called me. I haven't called my insurance company. It's important to remember, insurance rates are not based upon the trip purpose. Insurance companies don't care, well, maybe slightly, but at the end of the day, there's no real difference whether you're driving to work or to school or to church or whether you're driving somebody else with you. Your rates are a function of where you live and, more to the point, how many miles you're driving. So just because you become a volunteer driver doesn't mean your insurance rates are going to go up. If you're driving another 30 or 40,000 miles a year, yeah, maybe then. But simply being a volunteer driver does not automatically translate into increase in insurance rates. And unfortunately, there are horror stories from all across the country where insurance or individuals have seen their rates go up simply because they're volunteer driving, and there's legislation in many states that precludes that from happening. So if you start having the conversation in your community about volunteer transportation, I bet you serious money that one of the first issues that will come up from the naysayers will be, well, liability, we can't assume that. Well, yes, you can, and there are ways to manage that. I would encourage you also to collaborate with other volunteer programs. Again, I've mentioned the American Cancer Society on a couple different occasions here. I also mentioned briefly the faith-based initiative, the Faith in Action program. You have RSVP, Retired Senior Volunteer Programs, in play all across the country. There's no need for you to reinvent the wheel. Consistent with my belief of, community-based conversations and community-based planning, invest a little bit of time and find out who else in the community might already have a volunteer program. And just because they focus on one market segment doesn't mean they wouldn't be interested maybe in expanding and meeting the needs of others in your community. I also encourage you to, as with most everything, walk before you run. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't try to create the world's greatest volunteer transportation program. Aspire to that. Perhaps make that your vision. But begin with baby steps. But at least the key there is to begin. And perhaps most importantly, you can hopefully be an inspiration to others. I shared with several of my colleagues here at CUTR, one of my favorite books is entitled The Answer to How is Yes. What that really is saying is that the most important question to ask is, do we or do we not want to implement a volunteer transportation program in our community? If you answer yes to that question, then you begin to focus on the details, those 5 key decision points that I referenced earlier. But it takes somebody like one of you in the audience today to become inspired, to walk away saying, yes, I understand and I believe in that generosity heritage that Audino talked about. And yes, I believe that volunteer transportation can help meet the mobility needs in our community. So it begins with the inspiration, but like with so many things, inspiration unto itself is not sufficient. Necessary, but not sufficient. There needs to be work done. That's where the perspiration comes in. So it's a twofold equation, ladies and gentlemen, or 2 elements to that equation. Hopefully one of you walks away inspired to do something, but keep in mind, once that spark of inspiration occurs, that's when both the fun and the work begin, and it requires effort to make things happen. So with that, let me hit with my last poll question. How many of you in the room are volunteer drivers? I'll give you just a couple more seconds to answer for those of you who haven't yet. Okay, Jennifer, if you'd be kind enough to close the poll. Clearly, as you can all see, the vast majority of you are not. Now, if we were all together and I could see your faces and look in your eyes, I'd probably ask you, why not? But since I can't, I won't. But what I would encourage you to do is to thoughtfully and prayerfully consider that option. We talk a lot, particularly those of us who are working in the public sector. We talk a lot about programs, but not everything has to be part of a program. We as individuals have significant power to impact the world, and so those of you who aren't volunteer drivers, I would encourage you to think a little bit about that. For the 4 of you who answered yes, if I was wearing a hat, I would tip it to you and say thank you for the work that you do, and I bet you're a lot like me. You derive a heck of a lot more joy and satisfaction from that than you ever thought you would. So my final slide before opening it up to Q&A, try and tying it together. This graphic attempts to demonstrate what I characterize as the virtuous cycle. So let's assume you're a volunteer driver. and you give of your time and a little bit of your talent and a little bit of your treasure, which is, you know, your vehicle and the cost of fuel, and you provide a transportation to somebody, say a student, to get to school. Okay, so you do that on a regular basis. That individual, because of your generosity, that individual is able to acquire an education. Remember, I spoke earlier about how philanthropy advances physical, intellectual, and human capital. This individual gets a quality education, say at the high school level. Then they are inspired and they go on to get a college degree, and then they in turn acquire a job. They're successful. They become prosperous. Their prosperity, because they too understand the fundamental principle of generosity upon which our nation is built, and because they remember the generosity that you showed them 15 years ago by giving them a ride, how do they manifest their gratitude and their prosperity? Well, they too then decide to give, in this case, of themselves, and down the road they too become a volunteer driver, and so the cycle continues. So that's the framework within which I try to encourage all individuals in all communities to talk about and implement volunteer transportation built around or built upon the foundation upon which our nation is built. We are a generous nation, and we all can be giving more, and volunteer transportation is just one way to give, and it's an excellent way to help address the mobility challenges in your community. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your participation. There's my name, there's my cell number, there's my email. Be happy to speak with, and would enjoy speaking or interacting with any of you who are in the audience today. And with that, I will do my best to respond to any questions or comments or observations any of you may have.
Thank you, Michael, for that presentation. I've loaded the Q&A slide once again to give you the instructions on how to ask questions, but we do have some that have come in throughout the presentation, so we'll go ahead and start with those. The first question today is, please discuss the requirements of volunteer programs to meet FTA or state DOT requirements, including drug and alcohol testing, maintenance, etc.
I think part of that question, or part of the answer, is a function of how the program is funded. I mean, if in fact, and there's an example, well, there are examples all across the country of where New Freedom monies particularly have been utilized to help establish volunteer transportation program. There are examples of where, say, transit agencies or maybe municipal governments are utilizing vehicles that were acquired with FTA funds, making those vehicles available to volunteer drivers. In those cases where there is FTA money in play, then my understanding is, for the most part, those drivers would have to comply with drug and alcohol testing requirements. I'm pretty confident that not every state DOT has strict maintenance requirements for their vehicles. I may be wrong there, but that's probably going to, the answer to that is that's probably going to vary from state to state. So as you're having that community conversation and you're thinking about, oh geez, how are we going to fund or how are we going to pay for this thing, it's probably important to remember that if you're utilizing federal resources, it's like every federal program, ladies and gentlemen. You know, there are strings attached, there are requirements associated with it. So if you're using FTA money, it'll be important for you to investigate and ensure that you understood what all the requirements were associated with those dollars.
Thanks, Michael. Another question that has come in. This audience member says, the area I live in is a poster child for suburban sprawl. It's an area which it's very difficult to provide transit because of low density and long distances. There's a skeletal network of bus routes that serves a small percentage of the residents living close to major arterial roads. What is your general experience with community-based volunteer services that transport people to and from their homes to bus connections?
Candidly, I do not have a lot of direct experience with that. If I'm understanding the question correctly, the destination would, in this example, would be the bus stop for all these people. It's going to sound maybe somewhat flippant to you, but if you think about the bus stop the same way you might think about a senior center or a school or a major employment center, the fundamental construct of your volunteer program wouldn't change. And it's just, that's the destination, or that's the destination that you would be serving. So I don't really feel like I'm totally addressing the question, and I can appreciate what the questionnaire is coming from, because up until a year ago, I too lived in a poster child or picture child environment of suburban sprawl. And it kind of reinforces one of the points I tried to make early on, which is at the end of the day, because of the nature, the way our country has geographically and physically evolved, transit can't meet the mobility needs the way it did 50 years ago. And so we have to be finding other ways. And that's why it's important for, again, as you're having this community conversation about volunteer transportation, make sure that you're inviting your public transportation provider to the table, or if you are a public transportation provider in the audience today, I'd strongly encourage you to become a leader in convening that conversation. There's no reason for these services to be operating in isolation. The beauty of planning, if you will, is that you're bringing all resources to the table. And so if there are ways that a volunteer service can complement and serve as a feeder to a fixed route bus service, that's kind of an ideal solution in my book.
Thank you, Michael. The next question from the audience is, how can we affect policy change to get volunteer driver reimbursement up to the business IRS rate and not stuck at 14 cents per mile? This is a major obstacle, especially as fuel prices continue to rise. Volunteer drivers will continue to be a low-cost option even at the business reimbursement rate.
Well, I know of many programs where the mileage reimbursement rate is 30 cents, 35 cents, 50 cents a mile. I think the item that the questionnaire is asking about is that, I think, was that 14 cents a mile? I think that's the amount per mile that a volunteer driver can deduct from an income tax perspective. It's not a cap on how much an individual driver can be reimbursed. Frankly, that's a function of how much money you have. There are some volunteer programs where there is no mileage reimbursement. There are other programs where, as I just mentioned, the reimbursements range from, like I said, 30 up to 50 cents a mile. It's kind of a function of where the resources are coming from. So, again, I think the important point there is to recognize the distinction between the amount that the IRS allows you to deduct on your income taxes for volunteer miles you drive without being reimbursed. That's different than what a volunteer transportation program might reimburse a volunteer driver. And if that particular questionnaire would like to discuss that in more detail, again, I'd be happy to have that dialogue offline, either on the phone or via email as well.
Great, thank you. Another question from the audience. The VA has a volunteer transportation system, but in order to participate in it, they require the drivers to have their own auto insurance. I don't own a car, and therefore I cannot participate. Are there any insurance policies that can be purchased by individual drivers who do not own cars?
That's a wonderful question. I don't have the answer to that. Something tells me that the answer to that is probably yes, but I just don't know where to direct the questionnaire. Again, I would ask if that particular individual would be kind enough to perhaps email or call me later. I'd like to explore that with them, because again, I'm guessing that they're not the only person in that condition. So I'm sorry I can't answer the question any more intelligently than that.
I certainly will forward you the questioner's contact information.
Thank you.
If you'd like. And the next question is, can we get a copy of the slides? And I'd like to just remind everyone that, yes, you can obtain a copy of today's slides. In the upper right-hand corner, there is an icon that looks like 3 sheets of white paper. If you click on that icon, you can download a PDF copy of today's slides. And the second part of the question is about this webcast being available as a recording. And we are recording it, and it will be available for you to view. I will send an email to all of the attendees when the recording is ready for you to view from the website. So thank you for that question. Let's see, just quickly as a follow-up to the IRS question, the commenter says, if reimbursement exceeds IRS rates, there are tax implications, therefore serving as a deterrent for drivers.
I see. Well, first of all, thank you for whoever responded to that and clarified that. And again, I'm not negating or not debating that can be an impediment in some locales, but I think you will find, and you might want to again check out the Beverly Foundation and some of their research. You know, a lot of people, they volunteer not for the reimbursements. I realize that, you know, particularly when fuel is high and insurance rates keep going up, that, you know, every little bit of reimbursement can help. And particularly to this point, if all of a sudden it creates a small tax liability for you, that too may be a small impediment. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for us, as we're having these conversations, to try and focus on the greater good that resides in all of us. And I know that may sound Pollyannish to some of you, but so be it. There are, as I said, that's why I keep reinforcing this underlying foundation upon which our nation is built. We are all generous people, and to the extent that we can give, many of us want to give. Are the things that it would be nice if there was no tax penalty for volunteering, and it would be nice if that IRS rate was raised so there were no potential penalties. But I think at the end of the day that the folks that don't volunteer for that reason, that's probably a small sliver of the potential driver pool or volunteer pool that's out there. But again, thank you for whoever clarified that.
Thanks, Michael. We do have time for one last question, it looks like. Do you have experience with organizations that provide the vehicles for volunteers to drive?
Yes and no. How's that for a waffle answer? I'm guessing there's more to the question than the yes/no.
That was the entire question.
I'll try to add a little substance to that. Yes, I have experience with that. In fact, in a lot of places, that's a community decision that's been made as a way to hopefully entice more volunteers. If the sponsoring organization can provide the vehicle, and again, it goes back to a previous question, depending upon how that vehicle was paid for, there may be some administrative or regulatory issues that need to be addressed. But all of a sudden, if all I have to give is my time and not put wear and tear in my vehicle, then that creates a little different incentive for me. In fact, going back to the city of Gulfport down here in Florida, which I spoke a moment or two ago about, that's exactly how they do it. City-owned vehicles, and volunteers drive the city-owned vehicles, and the city wants it that way because it, from a risk management, from a liability, and from even a worker compensation perspective, that's how they structure it. So, again, I'd be happy to follow up with the questionnaire and talk about that one in a bit more detail. And Jennifer, before I hand it back to you to bring closure to it, again, I just want to thank everybody who participated in today's webinar. I've been honored to have the opportunity to visit with you, and I'm hopeful that, as I said early on, if just one of you can leave today's conversation with some degree of inspiration and interest and a willingness to do more in your hometown to help put more volunteer transportation service on the table, then it will clearly have been a successful hour from my perspective. But thanks to each and every one of you for carving out times from your busy days to participate today. With that, Jennifer, I'll leave it to you to bring closure.
Thank you, Michael. I'd just like to remind the audience that our next webcast is December 15th, 2 weeks from today, when our topic will be the implementation and outcomes of fare-free public transit. Our presenter will be Joel Belinsky that day. So I hope you can join us for that webcast as well. Just also a quick reminder, you'll receive a request to complete an evaluation via email in the next few days. So we'd like to ask you and thank you in advance for giving us your feedback on today's webcast. For those of you who are AICP members, we have applied for certification maintenance credit for this webcast. So to claim that, you will need to complete the evaluation. So with that, I'd also like to thank you for your participation and your attendance today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much.